Bhakti Yoga, the Bhagavatam. Today we're going to be speaking about what has been a very controversial topic for many, many thousands of years. For those of you who have studied religion, you would know that most religions in the world look down upon, or rather frown upon, or any kind of form of God. In the Abrahamic religions, you'll find this extremely prevalent amongst Christians, amongst Muslims, and perhaps even amongst Judaism. The idea of a form of God was something very abhorrent to them and had some very serious implications. It resulted in them destroying all the pagan gods and goddesses. Maybe that's why they were so upset. Maybe that's why they were so, fanatical about it. But they either destroyed or transformed the pagan gods and goddesses that they found in Rome and in various other places in Greece and across the world for that matter. In places like, we saw in India where the Muslims came and they broke down the deities in the temples, they attacked the people who worshipped them. It was a big deal for thousands of years, where the form of God was just not accepted or allowed by the Abrahamic religions. But then again, there was also a lot of that in India, where you look at the rise of Buddhism and of Sikhism and of Jainism, all of which rejected the idea of God having a form. I, for one, grew up with my grandfather belonging to what was called the Arya Samaj. The Arya Samaj was started somewhere in the late 1800s by Dayanand Saraswati, and he was not a believer in the idea of, or the Hindu idea of there being a deity or a form of God. And he opposed that until today his followers do not believe in worshipping any form of God. However, just like it happens with most faiths around the world, they do worship something. They worship the fire and they chant mantras. What the intention behind that fire is that you're focusing on something, and that's your dhyan, your meditation, your focus. And the same thing happens with the Sikhs, who use their book as their form of meditation and focus, and perhaps the songs they sing along with that. And the same happens in Christianity, where they've got now saints and Mary and Jesus and all, creating different idolatry, as you might call it. Sometimes even a book can become an idol. Sometimes people worship their book, like the Bible or the Gita. Those too can become idols. The question really is, why do we go in this direction, and what's it all about? So to explore that idea, I wanted to kind of throw a little bit of context into it. What was the original intention? So we'll see it we can explore it like this. The average person cannot see God, cannot hear God, cannot feel God. For them, God becomes a concept at an intellectual level, and that doesn't quite satisfy us. Or it becomes a belief, a faith, and that's what most religious people do. But in contrast, the yoga system offers something that is very practical, tangible, and experiential. It says that you can actually experience God, that you can see God, that you can love God. So, can God be therefore understood in a tangible, practical, and experiential way? Yes, the yoga system says so. The fact of the matter is, we all have senses, and our senses relate to forms and sounds and smells. Can the senses be channeled to focus or meditate on God, on a form? And would that be a useful way to go about helping us channel our minds? I mean, most people, when they're doing a meditation, might use a mantra, might use their breath. But what if you were to use a form? Would that be helpful? Of course, then the question comes up, does God have a form? If God is the source of everything and everyone, then why can't that which gave us these wonderful forms not have a form? Why does God have to be old and ugly for us to even begin to imagine his form, as they did in the paintings of Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel? The Vedas show us that the Supreme Being not only has a form, but that form is beautiful, sensual, and gorgeous. By meditating on this divine form, one can actually become free of the mind and the senses, from the illusion of this world, and ultimately from the cycle of birth and death. In bhakti, which is the path of loving devotion to God, there are 9 ways in which to know God. Shravanam, which is to hear of the Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Gita or any form, listening to about God. Kirtanam means speaking about God or chanting God's name, whether it's through japa, the beads, people do in Christianity in a rosary, or whether that's kirtan, singing, as we do, where we call and respond. Then there is smaranam, that is remembrance of God. You see, when you sing about and talk about God, that becomes remembered by the mind. Those mantras, those songs get remembered, and that becomes smaranam. So that's the 3rd way in which to know God. The 4th is pada sevanam, actually worshipping the feet of God, serving the feet of God. Archanam, we'll talk about what that is about the feet of God. We'll come to that later. Archanam is where you actually begin to worship God, either through incense or food or different offerings that you make that are pleasing to God. Vandanam is to bow down like you do namaste, or you bow down fully, prostrating yourself before God. Dasyam is to become a servant of God. Sakhyam, to become a friend of God. And Atmanivedanam, which is to completely surrender one's entire being, one's soul, one's Atma, in surrender to God. Now, in all of these, you may have noticed there were some that involved hearing and remembering and talking about God, but there were also some that involved worship and devotion. So here's how in bhakti we break it down. We said there are 3 stages of bhakti. There are many different divisions like this, but the one very important one to keep in mind is this. The first is the Kanishta Adhikari, or the beginning devotee, the person who is starting on this path. And for the person who is starting on this path, it is very important for them to have something tangible to get their hands into, to get their senses into. So for them, in the temple, the deity is worshipped, and they enjoy that. That's the beginning person. So this person thinks that God is found in the temple, or maybe, if you broaden the scope, in the church or in the mosque or in the gurdwara or wherever else people worship God, that God belongs in that house of worship. But there is a stage above that, in which is called the Madhyam, or the middle level practitioner, Madhyam Adhikari. And in that stage, one begins to understand that God is not just in the temple or the church or mosque or whatever else, but rather is in everyone, regardless of whether that person is of your religion or not. It's not dependent on God. God is not, a favorite of any particular religion. That God is in everyone. That God is everywhere, in everything, in every creature. And therefore one does no harm to any of them, and rather respects all beings and all of nature as an extension or as an expansion of God. And the ultimate stage is the Uttama, or the greatest level of the Uttama, or the topmost Adhikari, Uttama Adhikari. And such a person feels that everyone else is connected to God. Only I am disconnected. Only I am worthless. Only I am not good enough. Only I am here in this world, while others have been liberated and have gone back to God. I stay here, helpless, foolish. This is the sign of greatest humility, and on the path of devotion, humility is considered one of the greatest resources for approaching God. So, given all of these, the deity, as I told you earlier, was there for the average person to focus their senses on God. And the deity is now in the temples, is dressed every day, worshipped with elaborate rituals involving incense and flowers and the blowing of conch shells and offerings of fire and water and sumptuous food, along with mantras and prayers and kirtan. So this is kind of the background, and here are some pictures to kind of illustrate the idea. This is Prabhupada, the translator of the Bhagavatam that we are reading from, worshipping the deities of Radha and Krishna. And that is Radha and Krishna on a very special occasion, dressed in outfits made entirely of flower petals. And here as well. So you'll see that these are the deities in the temple of the divine, that are worshipped with incense and flowers and ghee lamps and various other foods and substances. So now we come back to our conversation with Devahuti and Kapila. Before we start, we'll just throw this little piece in here, and then I'll be back with you in a moment. Welcome back. So as I was saying, we come back to the Bhagavatam and the story of Kapila and Devahuti. And Kapila is the incarnation of Vishnu speaking to his mother, Devahuti, and instructing her on the path of yoga. He's got some pretty wild and amazing things to say that most people don't realize. So he says that the goal of yoga is to concentrate the mind. Now most people think the goal of yoga is to get fit, or the goal of yoga is to somehow sculpt the body or make it more loose or flexible or to have good health. No, that's not the goal of yoga. That's not the purpose. That's not the point. He says the goal of yoga, the lakshya of yoga, is to concentrate the mind. This concentration of the mind is also known by another word in Sanskrit called dhyana. Dhyana is the original word for meditation. It means focus. When you learn to focus the mind, it becomes quiet. When the mind is scattered, as it is in today's time, where we have all these distractions from our phones and our notifications that come in and all kinds of other stuff, we are distracted. We are a distracted world right now, and therefore our focus is very scattered and scanty. What that does then is it makes the mind untrained. And when the mind is not trained in focusing, see, if you want to get anywhere in life, you've got to focus your mind. You've got to become very, very focused on what it is you want and what it is you're trying to achieve and where it is you're trying to go. If you're not focused, if you lose track of where it is, if you get all spaced out by smoking a lot of pot or doing a lot of other things to distract yourself, watching TV all day long, you're not getting anywhere. You're not going to achieve anything. So focus is essential, and the ultimate in focus is meditation. So Kapila says here, by practicing this system, which he's about to teach right now, one can become joyful and progressively advance towards the path of the absolute truth. Listen to this very carefully. So there are many goals we have in life, many things we want, many desires that we try to fulfill. But he says that but if you look at it, what is behind all of our desires? Is it not the desire to be happy? Is it not the desire to be able to somehow elevate ourselves from the muck of this world, the struggle, the suffering, and all of that we go through, and all of us go through it? How do we rise beyond that? That is what the path of yoga teaches us, the path of liberation, the path of freedom, not only from our mind, but from the influence of the world, so that neither the people in the world, nor the forces of nature, nor the circumstances can affect us anymore. So just to read that again, by practicing this system, one can become joyful and progressively advance towards the path of the absolute truth. And so what is this absolute truth? In fact, the Bhagavatam talked about it right in the beginning. It said the absolute truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. So these days, with the movie Matrix, it became very popular to talk about reality and illusion, that the world was in fact, part of the matrix and part of the illusion, and that there was something beyond that. Of course, they didn't know what was beyond that. They didn't talk much about that, what it took, to get out of the matrix. But the Vedas were talking about this thousands of years earlier. They were talking about how this world is an illusion, that everything we see and touch and experience here is part of that illusion. It's like a great movie or a video game, but it's so real that you get immersed in it for 50, 60, 80, 90, 100 years, however long we live. And through that time, we believe this is real. But in fact, if the scientists have looked at the world through their electron microscopes, they have found that none of it is real. None of what you consider solid matter is just atoms and protons floating in space. So what is this path, and what is it, and how does it lead to the absolute truth, that which is the source of all creation, that which is called God? How does it lead us there? And how does it make us joyful? What is the process? So he continues like this. He says, and he gives a whole series of things that one needs to do. So keep these in mind, because they will help you in understanding the path ahead. He says one should execute prescribed duties to the best of one's ability. The same point is brought up by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, that one should do one's prescribed duty. So what is your prescribed duty? It's according to your guna and your karma. Your guna is your aptitude. Those are the gifts you've been given. Maybe you've been given the gift of music or painting or art, or maybe you've been given the gift of mathematics. Whatever it is you are brilliant at, whatever it is that you do exceptionally well, even though you may not have any value for it, do that. Do that which is your natural innate gift. And by acting on it, so that is guna, your aptitude, and karma, your action. You act upon that which is your natural gift and talent, and you will be truly satisfied. You may or may not go on to become a millionaire. Not everybody needs to be a millionaire. For some people, that's hardwired in them, and they're able to do it. The rest of us sit back thinking, oh, I wish I could be that. That's you wanting to do someone else's prescribed duty. And that is never satisfying. You feel less than where you are right now. You don't achieve what it is you're meant to achieve. You don't do what you're meant to do. And instead you're lusting after or craving after what somebody else is doing and wishing you could do that. But that was not your calling. So he says, one should execute one's prescribed duties to the best of one's ability. One should be satisfied with as much gain as one achieves by the grace of God. In other words, don't be craving more and more and more. No matter how much you have, whether you are the richest person on earth or whether you're the poorest, it is not going to count towards your spiritual growth. None of it is going to count. You will not take any of it with you when you die, and you will have to leave it all behind. So it's very important to learn the art of being satisfied with as much gain as one achieves by the grace of God. One should worship the lotus feet of a spiritual master. Why? Because by worshipping the lotus feet of a spiritual master, of a guru, one actually can get closer to God. So the worship is not about just sitting there and worshipping someone, but it's actually acting upon the teachings of the spiritual master, of the guru. When you act upon those teachings, you see the progress in yourself. That is the real worship. It's being able to practically apply those teachings. Then he says one should cease performing conventional religious practices. You see, conventional religious practices which people do as a matter of ritual, as a matter of routine, they're not going to make you progress much spiritually. Right? They might give you 5 minutes of peace in the morning, and you do your little puja, or you do your little worship, or you read your little prayer, and it might give you a few minutes of peace. But he says instead of that, one should be attracted to those practices which lead to liberation. What are those practices? He's going to tell us in a moment. One should eat very frugally and should always remain secluded. So in other words, it's not about going and enjoying your senses, eat, drink, and be merry, but rather keep it simple. Eat very frugally. Don't eat too much. We've seen that the more people eat, the shorter their lifespan is. The less they eat, the longer they live. It's a strange thing, isn't it? And this is not just applied to eating, but it's also to all aspects of our life. Live very frugally and always remain secluded. So in other words, don't try to party all the time. And I know a lot of folks are into that, but hey, that's not the path of spiritual awakening and spiritual enlightenment. Then he says one should practice nonviolence and truthfulness. One should be satisfied with possessing as much as he needs for maintenance. It's not about greed and accumulating more and more and more and more. Possess as much as you need to maintain this body. That's it. Then he says one should practice celibacy. Now, not everyone's a monk and not everyone is renounced, but it is about learning to control the sexual desire. Why? And I used to puzzle over this too. I said, why? This feels like enforced imposition upon me. But the fact of the matter is that by controlling something, we become good at it. You see, when we are just rampantly chasing sex here and there and everywhere, then we are expending a great deal of our thought, of our energy, of our desire, and of our focus on chasing sexual desire. And it doesn't get us anywhere. We're never satisfied, because after it's over, you feel empty inside. So rather, learn to control the senses. Desires is not just about sexual desire, but any desire. Rein in your desires and live a life of simplicity, of austerity, of cleanliness. See, these are the things that are important, because to have a clean mind, we need to have a clean environment and a clean body. And by reining in the desires, we simplify our life. We still have the desires, but we minimize them. And further, then we study the Vedas and worship the form of God. Then he says one must observe silence, acquire steadiness by practicing different yogic postures. Control the breathing of the vital air, the prana. We'll come to that, and we'll actually do an exercise on that. And I want to kind of show you how it's done. Control the breathing of the vital air, the prana, and withdraw the senses from sense objects, and thus concentrate the mind on the heart. Very important. Concentrating the mind on the heart. The heart is also considered the sitting place of God. This is where God resides within us, the Paramatma, the great soul, who resides within all of us, here within the heart. That is why the heart is such a special place. And that is why the heart is the essence of our life, because God is the essence of our life, and that is that force that keeps that heart pumping and keeps it going for the entire duration of our life. So this is the process, the yogic process first. He begins with that. He says, fixing the prana, the vital air, and the mind in one of the 6 circles of vital air circulation. I think that is more like the chakras. Again, I may be wrong, but the places he indicates are the belly, the heart, the lungs, between the eyebrows, and above the brain. So this to me are basically the chakras. Thus concentrating one's mind on the Vaikuntha Leela, which are the transcendental pastimes of God. So, on one hand, fixing the life air and mind on the chakras, right, through your breath, and then meditating on the pastimes of Krishna or the Bhagavatam, like we're reading here. And then one comes into a place of samadhi where the mind becomes absolutely still. By these processes or any other, one must control the contaminated, unbridled mind. Unbridled is like when a horse doesn't have reins on it, then it is unbridled. That's why I've created a course online called Mind on a Leash, which is being able to really rein in your mind, just as you do a dog or a horse. So he says one must control the contaminated, unbridled mind. Why is it contaminated? By all the stuff of the world, all the stuff we've heard and all the stuff we've been told. Right? So by these processes or any other, one must control the contaminated, unbridled mind, which is always attracted to material enjoyment, and fix oneself in thought of the Supreme Godhead. After controlling one's mind and sitting postures, one should spread a seat in a secluded place and sit there in an easy posture, keeping the body erect, and practice breath control. So I'm going to do that breath control practice that he talks about here with you. And I'd like you to do it alongside. The yogi should clear the passage of prana by, so one's life energy, or chi as it is called in the Chinese system. One should clear the passage of prana, or vital air, by breathing in the following manner. So do this with me now. Inhale deeply. Fill up your belly and hold. Hold for a few seconds, maybe count to 5. And then exhale completely. Release all the air, completely exhale, and then hold again for 5 seconds. And then repeat. Inhale fully, filling up your belly with air. This is called diaphragmatic breathing. And then hold. Count to 5. and then exhale, releasing all the air. And after you've exhaled completely, hold and again count to 5. Eventually you can stop the counting. It's just that's in the beginning stages. It's helpful to do that. So he says here, this is done so that the mind may become steady and free from external disturbances. So this is a way of training the mind to focus on the breath. And so this is the first step he teaches, is about the breath meditation. In this way, very soon one is freed from all mental disturbances, just as gold, when put into fire and fanned with air, becomes free from all impurities. So how is it you become freed from mental disturbances? Because now your mind is not wandering here and there. You know how to bring it in. You know how to rein it in. I've given a lot more tools in my course, Mind on a Leash, but this is a great starting point. Then he says, by practicing the process of pranayama, that's what we were doing right now, one can eradicate the contamination of the physiological condition. And by concentrating the mind, one can become free from all karma, all negative sinful activities. By restraining the senses, one can free himself from material association. And by meditating on the Supreme Personality, one can become free from the 3 modes of material attachment. So we are attached to this world and we want so much from this world, our desires, but you will gradually find yourself becoming free of that. 2 things he's talked about. One is the pranayama, the breathing, and the second is by meditating on the Supreme Being. Now that part he's going to explain right now. When the mind is perfectly purified by this practice of yoga, one should concentrate on the tip of the nose and with half-closed eyes, and then see the form of God. So first step he told you was the breathing, but now while you're doing the breathing, you can concentrate on the tip of the nose with half-closed eyes. Right? So with your eyes half closed, looking at the tip of your nose, and now do the breathing exercise. And then see the form of God within your heart. How to do that part, just coming up right now. So these are some beautiful pictures to meditate on, and I'd like you to look at them, and I'd like you to take them into your own being, to really focus on them. These are pictures of Krishna playing his flute, and Vishnu, and we're going to be talking of Vishnu a lot in his form. Notice very clearly the 4 hands, the club in his hand, the conch shell, the disc, the lotus flower, the garland of flowers, the jewelry, the necklace of flowers as well, all of that. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to have you, as we go through this meditation, I'm going to have you close your eyes and actually visualize what you just saw or something like that. So he says here, the Supreme Being has a cheerful lotus-like countenance, face with eyes like the interior of a lotus. So if you like to close your eyes now, that would be a good time. The Supreme Being has a cheerful lotus-like countenance with eyes like the interior of a lotus and dark-skinned body like the petals of a blue lotus. He bears a conch, disc, and mace in his hands. His loins are covered by a shining yellow cloth, and a brilliant gem is suspended around his neck. Around his neck is also a garland of attractive wild flowers and a swarm of bees, intoxicated by its delicious fragrance, humming about the garland. He is adorned with a pearl necklace, a crown, and a pair of armlets, bracelets, and anklets. Keep visualizing, keep letting this image sink into you. He stands on the lotus of his devotee's heart. So imagine this form within your own heart. He is most charming to look at and gladdens the eyes and souls of those who behold him. He is eternally very beautiful and is worshipable by the inhabitants of every planet. He is ever youthful and always eager to bestow his blessings on everyone. His glories are always worth singing. For they enhance the glories of his devotees. So in other words, when those who sing his glories are also sung about, and they too are worshipped in that way. One should therefore meditate upon the eternal form of the Supreme Godhead until the mind becomes steady and still. Once again, I'd like you to open your eyes and now look at his feet. He's going to talk about the feet. By fixing one's mind on the eternal form of God, the yogi should fix the mind on each individual limb, starting with the lotus feet. The splendor of their beautiful ruby nails resembles the orb of the moon and dispels the thick gloom of one's heart. The splendor of the beautiful ruby nails resembles the orb of the moon and dispels the thick gloom of the heart. The blessed Shiva becomes all the more blessed by bearing on his head the holy waters of the Ganga river, which has its source in the water that washes the Vishnu's lotus feet, which act like thunderbolts hurled to shatter the mountain of karma stored in the mind of the meditator. One should therefore meditate on God's lotus feet for a long time. Now he's showing you how to meditate on the form of God. So starting with the feet, then the yogi should fix in his or her heart the activities of Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, for she is always found massaging the feet of Vishnu and serving him. The yogi should meditate on his thighs, on Vishnu's thighs, the storehouse of energy, which are whitish, blue, and like the luster of the linseed flower. Then one should meditate on his hips and the yellow girdle around them. The yogi should then meditate on his moon-like navel, which is the fountain, or rather the foundation of the entire universe and all its planetary systems. Then one should meditate on his nipples, which resemble a pair of exquisite emeralds and which appear whitish because of the rays of milk-white pearl necklaces adorning his chest. Once again, open your eyes, if you've been closing them to meditate, and look at the form of Vishnu here that he's describing. Let this form go deep into your being. Take it in within you. Breathe as you're watching. Look at the eyes. Look at the four hands, the lotus flower, the disc, conch shell. And one hand, which you're not seeing so clearly, is holding the club. Once again, now close your eyes and meditate as we read on. The yogi should then meditate on the chest of the Supreme Godhead, the abode of the goddess Mahalakshmi. His chest is the source of all transcendental pleasure for the mind and full satisfaction for the eyes. The yogi should then imprint on his mind the neck of the Supreme Being who is adored by the entire universe and enhances the beauty of the Kaustubha gem which he wears around his neck. The yogi should then further meditate on his four arms, which are the source of all the powers of the demigods who control the various functions of material nature. Then one should concentrate on the polished ornaments, the disc or Sudarshan chakra, which contains 1,000 spokes and a dazzling luster, as well as the conch which looks like a swan in his lotus-like palm. The yogi should then meditate upon his club, so the club that is held by Vishnu, Kamudaki, which is very dear to him because it smashes the demons who are always inimical to the devotees. So by that you also know that Vishnu or God or Krishna has your back, that no harm can come to you, that no negative energies, no demoniac creatures of the seen or unseen can harm you. One should then concentrate on the beautiful garland on his neck, which is always surrounded by bumblebees with their nice buzzing sound. One should meditate upon his pearl necklace, which is considered to represent the pure living entities who are always engaged in serving him. The yogi should then meditate on his lotus-like face, which appears in different forms in this world out of compassion for the anxious devotees. See, he comes at different times into this world, incarnates as an avatar, out of compassion for the anxious devotees. Sometimes there is a lot of trouble in the world, and he needs to come to help us out. His nose is prominent, and his crystal clear cheeks are illuminated by the oscillation of his glittering alligator-shaped earrings. The yogi then meditates upon the beautiful face of Krishna, which is adorned with curly hair and decorated by lotus-like eyes and dancing eyebrows. A lotus surrounded by swarming bees and a pair of swimming fish would be put to shame by its elegance. Once again, open your eyes, and this time you're looking at the form of Krishna holding his flute. Meditate on this form now. And then another one. And once again, let this form go deep into your heart and capture it there. Just as you take photographs these days of all kinds of beautiful scenes that you see, take this form in and let it captivate your heart and mind. Here's another one. The yogi should then contemplate. Now once again, close your eyes and go back into meditation. The yogi should then contemplate with full devotion on the compassionate glances frequently cast by his eyes, for they soothe the most fearful agonies of his devotees. His glances, accompanied by loving smiles, are full of abundant grace. One should then meditate on the most benevolent smile of Krishna, a smile which for all those who bow to him dries away the ocean of tears caused by intense grief. The yogi should also meditate on his arched eyebrows, which are manifested by his internal potency in order to charm the sex god for the good of the sages. In other words, he charms away desire from us so that we may stay focused on him. With devotion steeped in love and affection, one should meditate within the core of one's heart upon the laughter of the Supreme Godhead, which is utterly captivating. When he is laughing, one can see his small teeth, which resemble jasmine buds, rendered rosy by the splendor of his lips. Once devoting his mind to this, the yogi should no longer desire to see anything else. Thus, gradually, the yogi develops pure love for the Supreme Godhead. In course of time, as one's devotion progresses, the hairs on one's body stand erect through excessive joy, and one is constantly bathed in stream of tears caused by intense love and ecstatic rapture. Gradually, even the mind, which was used as a means to be attracted to God, now withdraws from all material activity. Prabhupada in the purport writes about Nibbija yoga or lifeless yoga, when the mind does not automatically engage in serving or remembering God, and Sabija yoga or living yoga, where one's loving devotion is fully developed and one remembers and serves God incessantly without artificially meditating on his form. This is called Krishna consciousness, he says. Now you may open your eyes, and I'll conclude this part here. That was a lovely meditation on the form. So we can do the meditation with our eyes, but we can also do it through our ears. Kapila continues explaining, when the mind is thus completely freed from all material contamination and detached from material objectives, the mind becomes like the flame of a lamp. At that time, the mind has experienced being one with God, or rather experiences being one with God because it is aligned with Him. Aligned with. Like Christ says, I and the Father are one. One's mind is now aligned with God. and therefore one with him, and freed from the interactive flow of the material qualities. The mind ceases from all material reaction and thus becomes situated in its own glory, transcendental to all material conceptions of happiness and distress. So you're no longer affected by happiness and distress. At this time, the yogi realizes the truth of his relationship with the Supreme Godhead. He discovers that pleasure and pain, as well as their interactions, which he attributed to his own self, are actually due to the false ego, which is the product of ignorance. Because one has achieved his real identity, means in other words become completely situated in the soul, one is living from the soul now, one has gone beyond the false identity of the ego and of the body and become completely identified with the soul and with God. Because one has achieved his real identity, the perfectly realized soul has no conception of how the material body is moving or acting. Just as an intoxicated person cannot understand whether or not he has clothing on his body. What a great example that is. Right? An intoxicated person doesn't even realize if they're wearing clothes or not. But in the same way, the self-realized person has no conception of how the material body is moving or acting. They are simply identified with the soul. The body of such a liberated yogi, along with the senses, is taken charge of by God, and it functions until its destined activities are finished. The liberated devotee, being awake to his true nature and thus situated in samadhi, the highest perfectional stage of yoga, does not accept the byproducts of the material body as his own. Thus he considers his bodily activities to be like the activities of a body in a dream. And as he sees all of this stuff as if it's a dream, and all the stuff that one has, one's house, one's possessions, everything, as a dream, giving none of it any importance. Because of great affection for family and wealth, one accepts children and money as one's own, and due to affection for the material body, one thinks that it is his. But actually, as one can understand, that his family and wealth are different from him, the liberated soul can understand that he and his body are not the same. The blazing fire is different from the flames, from the sparks, and from the smoke, although all are intimately connected because they are born from the same blazing wood. So you see that blazing wood, that is God. And from that God come all these manifestations, flames and sparks and smoke. But what is behind it all is the wood. In much the same way, behind the entire existence, behind creation, behind everything is God. And when we begin to understand that, we realize there is only God that we are seeing. Everywhere there is God, in the good and the bad, in what we like and in what we don't like. That duality of liking and disliking is all a creation of the mind and the ego. But when you go beyond duality and you no longer think of things from this good and bad concept of how things should be and should not be, what should happen and what should not happen, then suddenly your mind is free. Then things are what they are, and whatever happens, happens, and there is neither a better nor a worse. All of it is part of the Leela, part of the story, part of the game. In fact, when you're dead and you look back at this life, that's exactly what you're going to think. But the challenge is to do it while you're in this life, while you're in this body, is to be able to see that all of this is Leela. It's just a story. In fact, everything you've had up till now is just a story. You'll go out and tell people your story, but it's a story. Where is it happening right now? What happened a day ago, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? Where is it now? Just a memory in your mind, bits of data that you keep repeating to people as your story. But is it real? And if that isn't real, then is this real? What is happening now? Because this moment will also become the past. And it will become as unreal as the past is. You see my point? There is no reality to any of it, and yet we are so attached to all of it. Why? Because that's what the mind does. It holds on to the story. It holds on to this reality. It holds on to the stuff of the world, the relationships that we have, the things that we possess, all of that. And that is the cause of our suffering. to be free from this suffering, one has to let go. Let go all of it. Let go what you think. Let go what you believe. Let go what you have. Let go everything. That's the key to freedom. The Supreme Godhead, who is known as Param Brahma, the source of the entire universe, Param Brahma, is the seer. So he's the witness. He's seeing everything. He is different from the soul, or the individual living entity, who is combined with the senses, the five. So we, the living entity, are intermingled with the senses, the elements, and consciousness, and our ego. But God, who is the source of everything, is witnessing this. And is different from us. Some people say, oh, I'm God, you're God, we're all God. No, you're not. No, you're not. You are a tiny, infinitesimal particle of God. Yes, you have the qualities of God in your purified state as a soul. But you're not God. Because if you were, I'd like you to produce something and demonstrate that. Perhaps you could produce a blade of grass, just one blade. Perhaps you could produce a mosquito or a fly or a butterfly, even better, right? But you can't. If you were God, you could do this. But you can't. So let's take away those silly notions. Let's continue with what Kapila is saying. A yogi should see the same soul in all manifestations. In other words, what is in me is in you. Namaha astute. That is the real Sanskrit behind namaste, which is that I honor the divine within you. So it says here, the yogi should see the same soul in all manifestations. We are all of the same stuff. Though we are different and unique, and yet we are of the same stuff. We are simultaneously one and different. We are simultaneously the same and unique. And if your mind can't hold on to that idea, well, that's because the mind is dualistic and it wants to think of things as either or. But we are actually both simultaneously. We are same and different simultaneously. You can ask me more in the questions if that's not clear. A yogi should see the same soul in all manifestations, means not just in other people, but also in all animals, in all trees and all plants and all nature. For all that exists is a manifestation of different energies of the Supreme. In this way, the yogi or devotee sees all living entities without distinction. That is realization of the Supreme Soul, or the Paramatma, the Great Soul. As fire is exhibited in different forms of wood, so under different conditions of the modes of material nature, the pure spirit soul manifests itself in different bodies. Thus the yogi can be in the self-realized position after conquering the insurmountable spell of Maya, or illusion, which is very difficult to overcome. So with that, we end this chapter of the Bhagavatam, and I'm going to open things up to questions, but just a point of conclusion, and that is that all of these processes are actually there to help us focus our mind so that we may become free of what he describes here as the insurmountable spell of illusion, which is very difficult to overcome. So if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them in the comments or in the chat. Or if you'd like to come in, I'd love to have you on the right here live with me and say what it is you want to say. Ask what you want to ask. Any questions at all? All right. It seems some of our normal people who are there on Facebook aren't there today. Cece, welcome. Lovely question here. Cece is asking, Krishna is omnipotent because he appears genderless, right? So it's not that Krishna is omnipotent because he appears genderless. He is omnipotent and he is genderless. We use the term he, but actually Krishna has both masculine and feminine aspects. We introduce people to the idea first through the masculine, through Krishna. He leads the way. Radha is in a very separate, in a special category, his beloved, his partner, his feminine side. It is the more advanced person who gets to understand that feminine. It's a very sacred place. It's a very beautiful place. But the presentation of Krishna is neither as masculine nor feminine. Although he is in many ways the Purusha, the enjoyer, and all of us are to be enjoyed by him. Therefore, he is the only male, and we are all female in that sense. In the context of the Vedas, he is Purusha, the enjoyer of the world, the creator and the enjoyer, and we are that which is to be enjoyed by him. So therefore, using that masculine feminine terminology. But essentially, the portrayals are always, and the portrayals are also in bluish color, because that's to indicate a highly evolved being. Wherever there is a very highly evolved being, a god, goddess, they're always shown in bluish color, typically. All right, let's move over to here and see what other questions we have. Switch this around too. Okay. Oh, I love this question by Silly. Silly says, this meditation with a focus on aspects of Vishnu and Krishna brings about humility at the feet, the beauty of compassion at the chest, and beyond to joy and melting illusion. Oh my goodness, thank you. That is so poetically said. Love that. Thank you. You start with the feet because the feet are the place where you bow down. That is the place of humility. See, the reality is we all want to be God. We want to be the enjoyers of this world, though we didn't create it. We want to own and possess things, though none of this is actually ours. We want to control things, though the supreme controller is God, Ishvara Parama Krishna. So he is the supreme controller, and yet we have the arrogance to want to control this world, to own the world, to possess the world. And then the stupidity of it all is that we leave it all behind, and none of that ever goes with us. And we see this happen to thousands and tens of thousands of people all around us, and yet we never wake up to understand that. Yudhishthir in the Mahabharata actually says that. He's asked, what is the most incredible thing you've come across? And he says exactly this. He says, thousands of people have died, and yet people think, I will not die. Thousands of people have left everything behind, and they think, and people still think, all of this is mine. So this is the illusion of Maya. This is the illusion we all live under, and it's so hard to get out of. That's why we need all the tools and all the help that we can get. This process of meditation that was described today by meditating on the form of God is there to help us. Now, if you can do it through hearing it, that's great. If you can do it through visualizing, through seeing, looking, having an actual deity in your house and worshiping that deity, serving it, meditating on the feet and on the rest of the body, beautiful, do that. But whatever it takes, develop a meditation. So Seeley points out that we start with the feet, and that's humility, absolutely, because only from humility can we begin the path to love. Why? Because in humility we empty ourselves, and only when the cup is empty can it be filled. When you are full of yourself, there is no humility. And when you are full of yourself, you're this narcissist, you're this arrogant person who thinks no end of themselves. And yeah, I know such people can be very successful in this world, but they will not be successful on the path to God. And the path to God, as Christ says in the Bible also, he says, the greatest amongst you shall be the least, and the servant to all. It's the same idea here, thousands of years before he said it, is that the place where one captures the heart of God is through humility. Then when your cup is empty, when you realize you are nothing, you know nothing, you are an utter fool, you are worthless. You see, all these things that make the ego feel horrible, in fact make you depressed, make you even suicidal, are all coming because that realization is actually the truth. But you need someone who is deeply spiritual to show you how to decode that truth, how to turn that truth into your greatest strength. Once you understand that that realization that I am worthless is actually the most powerful understanding in spiritual life, because that's humility. And that humility is the doorway to God. And so if you now use that, instead of being, you see, if you live at the level of the ego, for the ego it's devastation. You can't function. You're not able to survive. If I'm nothing, if I'm worthless, I am unlovable, and so on, the whole story goes, well then, life's not worth living. But that's not the reality. One has to have a spiritual mentor or guide who can help you turn that around, for you to see that, hey, you have just had the most golden opportunity of all, the wake-up call of a lifetime. And if you learn to use that energy, you will find yourself in the greatest of bliss and the most wonderful experience of life that you could have ever had. This is not the end. This is just the beginning of the next chapter of your life. So, and then Cecilia goes on to point out the beauty of compassion at the chest. I love that. We come to his chest and she says, that is the home of Mahalakshmi. And he says, that is the place where the devotees go because, and I love the way you've done it, Celia, it's because that is the place of compassion. That is the place of the heart. That is the place of acceptance, of unconditional love. That's right. So you meditate on God as the source of that unconditional love, of that loving compassion that embraces you as you are and loves you with all your flaws. And finally you say, and beyond to joy and melting illusion. Ah, so beautifully said. Thank you. Cece clarifies. She says, I meant he is omnipotent, but also in gender. Yes, he's capable of being any gender. You're absolutely right. He's capable of being whatever he wants to be. There's a point where we did earlier where he chose to come as a boar. Boars are like those wild pig kind of thing, right? He came at one time as a fish. He came at one time as in so many different forms because he's playful. God is playful. God is not some serious guy sitting up there judging people and telling them, oh, you go to heaven, you go to hell, you go to heaven, you go to... Gosh, that would be so boring. He wants to play. He wants to fun. He wants to party. He wants to celebrate. And we're around the third canto, but as we're about coming to the end of it, but as we come into the 10th canto, you'll begin to see Krishna in all his glory, dancing and singing and loving and being there in a way that you've never heard of that being a possibility for God. But yeah, we're coming there. I love this, Cece. You've got another beautiful one here. She says, to meditate upon the appearance of Krishna is to slip out of the illusion and melt into the hands of God, surrendering. Wow. Thank you. That is beautiful. To meditate upon the appearance of Krishna is to slip out of the illusion. Exactly. Once you become captivated by that form of God, then the forms of this world no longer hold their sway or their control or their attraction for you. You have become attached to something better. It's just like kids when when they're kids, they like to play with toys, right? Barbie dolls or fire trucks or whatever else it might be. And then when they get older, those things don't hold any appeal for them. They get the real thing. They get a real car. They get a real house. They get a real partner. Then much the same way as we become attracted to the forms of God, to meditating upon God, to hearing about God, to speaking about God, to remembering God, we start to lose an interest in the world. We've become attached to, addicted to, immersed in something of a higher vibration. And when you find the higher vibration, the lower vibration holds no interest anymore. Just like a person who might be addicted to, say, alcohol or some other substance. But then when they actually get out of it, or even smoking, when they get out of it, they realize, oh my God, that was nasty. That was nasty stuff. I don't know how I was smoking. I don't know how I did all that all those years. And you realize, God, life is so much nicer without it. And now you don't even want to be around someone who's smoking anymore. I never smoked, so I don't know. I'm not speaking from my experience, but this is what I've heard from people. The point being that we are here and all facility has been given to us to get out of here. Take the opportunity, use these different processes. Some people might think, oh no, my path is better than your path. Please don't waste your time with stuff like that. Use all these different paths, try them out, see what works for you. Try having a deity, try having a form in front of you, a picture maybe of Krishna, and then meditate on him, starting with the feet, and then gradually moving to the thighs, the hips, the chest, the shoulders, the arms, the flute, everything. Meditate on him. And as you do, as you chant the mantras, whether you're chanting Om or you're chanting Hare Krishna mantra, chant the mantras, listen to kirtan, you have lots of kirtan on YouTube now. And there's wonderful singers like Janavi Harrison and others who you will absolutely love. Listen to the music and let it fill your mind and fill your consciousness until nothing remains except God. That's my hope for you. That's my prayer for you. And that is my deepest offering to you. Thank you so much for being here. I love all of you. And I'm so grateful to you for your support and for being here week after week and savoring these wonderful messages. Thank you. Jai Shri Krishna. Hare Krishna. Radhe Radhe.